Good day, everyone. Well, it looks like the Russell 2000 has now achieved 15 up days in a row.
Is that a
That's got to be
record?
some sort of record.
It's got to be.
It's got to be. I don't know. I don't know the Russell 2000 well enough in that sense, but I'm sure there will be an article out that it's at a record or nearing a record. And yeah, it's interesting. You know, obviously the small caps have been doing very well. A number of industry groups have been doing well in this post. Um, President-elect Trump environment.
You mean the
And
Trump
meanwhile,
rally?
we,
You mean the Trump
you know,
rally?
it's I wouldn't call it a I would just call it it's a good rally based on his business policies. So yeah, you can attribute
Okay.
it to what I guess is coming, the market sees as coming. But the question is he going to be able to get all these things through? Yeah, there is no gridlock, so I think the odds are greater. So it is looking pretty good, but that doesn't mean that's guaranteed that everything's going to make it through. Um, but yeah, you see the market's primed, and meanwhile the gold and bonds they continue to head lower. The market's obviously priced in a rate hike for next month, and the dollar, of course, has been quite strong. And so these things generally tend to correlate when you have this situation. And we've, of course, talked about a number of stocks that came through. They had some good setups as their price volume got quiet over a number of days after having sharp pullbacks. Of course, as many of you know, we call these setups voodoo or VDU for volume dry up. If you look at, for instance, well, EMYOV, that's the screaming stock today.
What did you
It
call
got
it?
very quiet.
Emyov?
The
Emyov?
screaming EMYOV.
Okay.
More
I
EMYOV in
call it
terms of the
Myov.
ticker symbol. Just the ticker symbol.
Okay.
I usually go with the tickers, but I guess it's Myovant. But
Oh,
yeah,
you know what?
EMYOV is
I don't have my screen up. Let me put my screen up. Sorry, there's a Russell, you guys. 15 straight days up. Here's gold getting pummeled. Here's silver getting pummeled. Here's bonds getting pummeled actually. I'm just covering these real quick, Dr. K, because I didn't have my screen up at the
yeah,
time.
sure.
And then so now we're looking at, what was the stock you're looking at? Oh, M-Ball. Yeah, we're looking at that. Thanks for
EMYOV.
pointing that out, you guys. Hey, we're a little bit slow today. You know, a lot of red wine and yesterday, you know, it makes me a little slow this morning. Is it MYOV? That's right. I want to call it M-ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice move. This thing is so thin, though. I was actually sitting on the bid last week when it was dipping down in here and just picking off 500 share blocks till I got up to about 5 or 6,000 shares, which is totally a minuscule position because it's so thin. I can't really get big in it. But look at it. Of course, it's going to have a huge move. Now it's back to the top. Maybe we get an IPO U-turn here. What do you think?
Well, it looks like we could very well get that because the markets seem to be a bit on better footing right now.
Yeah.
So, you know, if this works out, then this will be hitting new highs. But a lot of these IPOs prior to QE and then post QE, they have these pocket pivots. This one has a pocket pivot yesterday, or rather on Wednesday. And yeah, it's a very high probability event that it would do what it did today. And then, of course, prior to yesterday's pocket pivot, you had it very quiet in there. So, you know, some of you may have been buying on the quiet when it was trading, you know, around 11 and change. And we've seen that with a number of other names in this market, like well,
There we go.
Acacia is an obvious one that got very quiet prior to the 22nd of November, and it was kind of along its 10-day there. And then yesterday, on the 22nd, if any of you had the time to follow the intraday move, it kept hitting 74. So basically, you put a stop in at 74.01, and you're in the money immediately. And then from there, it proceeded to go all the way up to 78. So you know, that's a very kind of quick, easy, obvious setup, but you had to be there to see it on the intraday pattern.
Yeah.
And this stock, as you know, this was a price leader, so it doesn't look like much on the chart, but percentage-wise, on the 22nd, it was up, you know, 5.7%, because it's made such a big price move. So now it's backtracking, backing, and filling. And of course, if if the fundamentals play out in this company, it could be seeing $100 again at some point. Then we have some other names that have also exhibited this kind of quiet action. Well, we had the super cap Qualcomm, which we talked about. It got very quiet along the 50-day. We sent a memo out on this one, and then on the 22nd again, it made a move. So, and that was, you know, this is not a fast-moving name like Acacia, but the setup is correct. So
one thing I would notice,
you still could get a few percent.
Okay. I would note you got a couple of 5-day
Yeah.
pocket pivots. There's a couple of 5-day pocket pivots coming back above the 10-day and the 20-day line. So this looks constructive. I think if the market goes higher, it goes higher with it. So.
Yeah, and it has a high correlation because of the nature of the stock. And then you had the smaller cap TLND, and that one, you know, that one was trying to get quiet, and what happened is it was at its 20-day then 50-day, but it hasn't been able to prove out.
You know what I would note about this one, Dr. K? On this one, I think what you're looking at here, the moving averages might become less relevant here, and a lot of times the moving averages just live to fake everybody out, and so what you have is a move from here to here off the lows, and this is actually also a let's look at the whole thing here. Let me clean this off again. Here we go. So you have this base here, and it undercuts, and then I think you undercut this low in here, and now you start to rally, and you come back up here. You're obviously going to run into some overhead from the left side of the chart, right? So you get the move up, and now you've retraced about half of this, and it might be in a position, because you come down, you close here, where it'll fake people out and then turn. The only problem with this one is that what does it trade, like 123,000 shares a day?
It's really thin, and it's a small cap. So,
Yeah,
and the other problem is that, you know, it had a lot of promise after it went public, but since then, it's the chart itself, it looks like it's going a bit slow now. I mean, if it really were a hot IPO, it wouldn't take this long to form this kind of pattern. It'd be a lot more aggressive. So yeah, there's a few flaws basically in this one that you have to be mindful of.
Look at the
obviously
chart.
Today it breaks through the 50-day, so you want to get out of the position obviously without, you know, any questions. You know, so you keep your risk absolutely to a minimum on.
You're talking about if you bought it on the. I mean, the only way to buy this thing would be on the pullback into the moving averages, and you would be down what, $1, a little over $1 at this point.
You'd be down if you bought it on the 50-day, you know, and then today it went below, you know, below say the low of Wednesday, then you know you'd be out maybe 1% on your trade, if that, because you're keeping your stops real tight.
Yeah. How about some of these other? What do you think of this one, EDU? This is still on our VoSI focus list right now. This actually is hanging in there, surprisingly enough. Any thoughts there, Dr. K?
EDU. Actually, no. I was just looking at our list. Is it still on the list, or did we yank it?
I don't know. I don't.
Last week.
I don't know if we took it off.
Because I think we did, because it went below the 50 and it wasn't. I don't know. I think it was like a gray area stock, but I think we did remove it, and now it's attempting a bounce again. It still looks. It does look viable.
No, it was still on.
It looks viable.
No, it was still on. I think.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. That would have been, what week would that have been? The 14th? No, I'm sorry.
That would have been the 19th, 20th. I'm pretty sure we removed it on.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So anyway, it's bouncing here, and you know that can happen.
EDU is still on. The 4 that were left on over the weekend were NVIDIA, New Oriental, Gigamon, and Airgain. So those were left on. We took off.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's my bad. Yeah, no, EDU is still on. That's right.
Yeah, we
was
unloaded.
looking at the new. I'm focused on this new list that's come through. So it's there's quite a few new names that are of interest and that have already made moves.
You want to go through
in this
them all?
market, you have to be pretty quick. Yeah, I'll go through some more.
Okay.
Let's see, where were we? I think there was Lite, L-I-T-E.
Okay.
That one came through the 50-day, now then it pulled back, and it's still dancing along the 50-day there. It's had a nice move, and the the fundamentals behind the company, the story behind the company is obviously tenable. Then you've got that WB that also made a nice move on the same day that Acacia made the move. Those were the two big winners that day. Where I think it was up over 7%
on earnings after
came up through well, came up through the up to the 50-day, but it had what I liked is it had a pullback, and then it just started to make a nice move, and it just didn't quit all day. So this one also looks viable. Now it's
you don't have a problem with the pullback, do you?
No, I mean the pullback on a relative basis today, where it closed, it looks okay. I think it's probably going to back and fill a little bit.
Yeah, I think you probably have some overhead up here from the failed breakout here, which rolled over. So you probably have some buyers in here are going to get out even. So in this case, if you take into account the context of the pattern, in other words, the overhead here, and the fact that you did get some, hot money sees the breakout here and it fails. So now they want to bail out, and they'll sell into rallies come up into this area. So I think in that context, this looks normal. So what I would be doing on this is looking at the 10-day line more as an area of support in the selling guide. How about you, Dr. K?
Yeah, no, that sounds reasonable. You always want to have some sort of game plan. When you invest, you want to be able to strategize these patterns out. And you might have a different way of looking at it. You might have a longer-term approach, which is fine. The market's fractal. Yeah, I mean, I personally like to use the 10, the 20, and the 50. But whatever moving averages you choose to use is.
Dr. K, I would point out also, if you look at the weekly chart, you closed above the 10-week line, which is at 48.86. So you close about 20 cents above the 50-week line. And look at the big volume. You have some nice volume here on the weekly chart, which I think looks pretty good. So that's what that looks like. And you did close above the 10-week line. So within that context, what happened on the daily chart is probably less significant.
Yeah, and also what Gil just did there, I mean, obviously I hope all of you look at both the weekly and the daily when you're sizing up a stock. We don't always do that in these explanations, but in practice, I don't think I ever ignore the weekly because it's just another piece of information. It gives you a broader picture as well. But those two types of time frames to me are indispensable. And then, of course, if you have the time to watch during the day, then you can actually go in and use things like a 620 on a 5-minute chart to fine-tune your entries and exits. It's not essential. Again, I mean, like I said, there are plenty of examples where you can set up your buy limit or your buy stop on stocks, and hopefully you get your position during the day, and then of course you have your sell stop put in. Always put in a sell stop after your order is executed, or you can do a buy stop. You can do a buy limit, sell stop, all kinds of combinations. So at least you're protected on the downside if you can't tend to your position during the day. So we've got also the more conventional breakout we had in TTD. That's the trade desk, and that was it's an IPO. It's a double bottom breakout, and we mentioned this one. The thing is, you have to have stronger markets for these more conventional setups to work, and I think we are in a stronger environment. So this may very well start moving to the upside. And right now, if you bought this at say 27.5, your risk is still pretty minimal. If it were to sink back down, obviously below that into the base, then you'd be out of the position. But
it's actually
right now,
a better setup on this, Dr. K. If anybody was alert to this, when you undercut this low, you can see you get the undercut, and then you get a rally, and then there's a pocket pivot here coming up through. It's off the 10-day and up through the 20-day line, right there, and then you get a little pullback back into the 20-day line here, and the volume dries up a little bit here, and then you turn around and you get this other pocket pivot coming off the line. I think actually this went to this, which day did we put this out? Was it on the big move up, or was it on the
I think we put this out, let me check actually.
That would have been
okay, we've got this one on the 22nd. We put this one on the 22nd. So Actually, did we talk about this sooner than that? Let
I
me
thought we put it
check.
out sooner than that, but
Yeah,
that's
I
what
thought
I
I
point
think
to.
we
And I would come into the
well
stock on
we
that
put this one on the 22nd. Basically, when it cleared the midpoint, then the next day, it was pulling back on low volume, and then we put it out as a double bottom breakout.
day.
But what is interesting about this pattern is that you had that pocket pivot on the 11th of November, and then a constructive pullback, and then it started moving up higher. Now the reason you'd get interested in it on the 11th is because notice the new issue price is 18, but it opened at what 80% above that. So you could call this, it's an interesting story. You could call this a hot IPO. That's why you could, if this were a stock, say that went new issue at, your typical thing, $15 new issue, and it opened around 15 or 16, and it had this kind of pattern, I wouldn't really be so interested. Also, if the story wasn't compelling, then this kind of pattern, even if you have a pocket pivot, well, again, like I said, IPOs, pocket pivots tend to work pretty well, so you could still play it, but I'd be less interested in it because it doesn't show as much, I think, potential upside. Whereas this one has a good story associated with it, and it's basically trading 80%, 70-80% above its new issue price. And again, to me, it looks like, if the market continues higher overall, if we continue an uptrend, I would think this would continue higher as well and eventually hit new highs. So we got one on the list that we may have to yank. In fact, I would yank it. That was LN, Line Corporation. Now we mentioned this when it went through its 20-day, and we suggested that if you're going to buy it up here, I mean, you could wait for a constructive pullback, or you could buy it with a tight stop just under its 20-day, because then your risk is pretty small. Now today it gapped lower on a downgrade, and it gapped when it opened. It was 2.7% below its 20-day moving average. So you would immediately have sold. When you get these gap down situations, you don't ask questions. You're just out of the stock immediately. And so your risk would have been contained had you bought it when it was trading through the 20-day, above the 20-day. Maybe your loss on the stock would be 3% or 4%, so it's still very manageable.
It got hit with a sell rating from, I think, UBS. Hit them with a sell rating. I mean, that's very rare, too, for an analyst to come out with a sell rating. But that's what they did, so that's what killed the stock right there. But it was acting pretty well prior to that. I think that if this is going to bottom, it's going to take more time. And that move off the lows is pretty sharp. And actually, if I had bought, say, on the move up to the 10-day line, I probably would have sold into something like that and then see how it settles in. And it's obviously not working as well. What else you got there, Dr. K? Anything else? Are we done there?
I was just looking at the list. There's, I think we've gone through most of them. I mean, we haven't gone through any of the old names. I mean, if you look at NVIDIA, that's doing everything that it should. That one has managed to hold to its 50-day all the way up since we put it on, many months ago. And so that's been one of the great price leaders in this market. And you've got GIMO. That's another one that seems to be okay. Nothing wrong there. AGX is another one. That one we put on. It never had one of those constructive pullbacks where you're buying closer to your support point, because the market's been strong, and so it just keeps going. So if you missed out on this one, it's understandable. You can't kiss all the babies, but this one looks good if you did manage to catch any of it. What else is there? There's one we haven't put on the list yet. That's Momo, but it's getting nice and quiet and tight in the pattern there. And if this market keeps higher, it very well could break out of this little sideways move and at least make a stab for its 50-day. Which,
it undercut this prior low.
It's about 12%.
So you see volume drying up, and you get pickup in volume each time it pulls down. And these 2 days here, and closes in the upper part of the range, more or less. But this is kind of just sitting in a little Louis type pattern where you had a failed breakout and you break down, you undercut the low over here and you rally back up above it, and now you're hanging tight, you're above the 10-day line. This may get going. What do you think of Chinese stocks in general, though? Some of them still are a little bit tenuous, are they not? Like, say, what do you think of NetEase?
A lot of a lot of them have gotten beat up because, again, because of well, there's a Trump rally, but then there's also the Trump the Trump effect of tighter trade restrictions and things that worries the market. So a lot of these names, like NetEase and Baba and so on, these names have gotten hit very hard as a result. And anyone can notice they haven't been participating in this rally that has hit a number of industry groups and market indices. I mean, you can see the mid caps and the small caps have enjoyed nice rallies. But yeah, the Chinese stocks have gotten hit pretty hard. So I would be very cautious about getting involved in any of these names at this point.
Yeah, Baidu's kind of down there. Baba has been acting a little funky. That's looking like we talked about last week. That's actually looking like it wants to eventually get to the 200-day line. Hasn't gotten to the 40-week line yet. But a lot of these are questionable. I guess maybe you'll see some of these come out of these pullbacks or corrections once there's more clarity regarding what exactly Trump is going to do with China. So anyways, I got some questions here. Somebody's asking, somebody says, seems like none one, or oh, you mean no one saw DE move? Well, I mean, there's anybody can see it. It's a big gap up. So if you're going to try and buy it, you would buy it, and using the intraday low if you want to try and buy it. I mean, any of these can be bought. The only problem with this is it's just starting to come out of this long-term pattern. How are the earnings on this thing? Isn't it like cat? Don't they suck?
It's terrible. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about these companies is that this has been decelerating on earnings and sales for many quarters, and if you look at the weekly pattern on this thing, it never ever makes any meaningful moves to the upside or downside. It's a really slow name, and it's the kind of name that puts you to sleep. Obviously, it's some of these names are doing very well just in the last few days because again of the Trump effect, the Trump factor. So.
Right.
But again, I wouldn't get all excited about this kind of thing because it just is a very slow, stodgy name, and keep in mind the size of the company and what it does. So I don't think by any means this is all of a sudden off to the races and we're going to see 30, 40, 50% gains in this kind of name anytime soon or really ever.
No, and if you see the Bible, if you see a gap up, you can always play it using the Bible gap up rules. You don't need us to bless it for you. But I mean, that's kind of easy to see. I run gap up screens all day long, and you'll see that. But it's hard to say that, oh, you need to buy this one or that one if the fundamentals are really poor and it's just a big industrial stock like Deere or Caterpillar just reacting to news of potential new policies coming from Trump. So, I mean, those are hard to play. How about, did anybody see this one? Viva Systems, that's not a bad gap up on a breakout. Notice how it's breaking out from this big formation, which is what, over about 3 years long, right? Yeah. And what do you think of that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of these names. I mean, the earnings are good. The fundamentals look pretty decent, but when it gapped up on the 23rd, you could take a position and use the gap up rule to minimize your risk.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It just there's better names. That's my view. And what it does from here. I mean, I suppose it could keep going on an uptrend. The fundamentals are strong.
Yeah.
So again, you don't need us to bless every stock.
How about, I like this one, ZTO. I think it should be a new car.
The new issue.
The name for a new car, the ZTO.
Like the GTO, like a Ferrari GTO.
Yeah, I remember. My dad had
Or the
an
Mustangs.
old Pontiac GTO that he had all tricked out with mag wheels and big tires and everything when I was a kid, I remember. Then he had to get rid of it and get a station wagon when he started having too many kids. So, but that's what this reminds me. But that's that's a nice little pattern you pull right into the 10-day and volume drying up. I guess you could buy it in there. Do you like this story? Whoa, look at that.
The story, they're gonna, I think, capitalize on the growing middle class in China. So, and that's a very very big demographic.
Yeah.
So and they are a big company. I mean, they're a $12 billion market cap company. So you know, look at their earnings and sales. If you can believe the numbers, I know the Chinese numbers are sometimes a bit distorted, but they're damn good anyway.
Yeah.
And Morgan Stanley was the underwriter. I find they generally pick their companies pretty well. So, you know, the thing was IPO'd at 19.5, and it has never traded up to 19.5. So
No.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'd be cautious on this one, but it's on my list to, you know, I am looking for some stronger action in the price volume because it could be one of these Chinese names that end up, you know, doubling from here sometime, you know, sometime out. So it's worth keeping on your list. Some of these IPOs are pretty interesting. They, you know, like what is it, QTNA. That one's involved in all the basically the wireless build out, which is
Wi-Fi
huge.
chipsets. Yeah, Wi-Fi chipsets. I mean, that's the same thing that I think PI is involved in that sort of thing. RFID or RFI is what is it? Radio frequency ID and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of it's
RFIDs, yeah.
And that's a nice move, but this thing is razor thin too. I think it trades 120-something thousand shares a day.
Yeah, it's a real small
But
cap.
it's a great story, though.
Right, and so this is on my list. I get interested in IPOs with good stories like this one, and it will go on my list. And I'll just have the patience to wait for a proper setup if it does come. But yeah, stocks like this, there's a lot of hot industry groups out there that have enormous acceleration going on, and so some of these IPOs I believe are capitalizing on that growth, and they should be monitored. So yeah, as a regular practice, running an IPO screen, say every week or two, just to keep abreast of any of the new issues that might have great potential is worth doing. Having a little section on your screen for like IPOs.
Yeah, I keep an eye on them. I've liked this one, Everbridge, on the see the undercut and rally here, and then you get I think a little pocket pivot move up in here, and that's setting up in a nice base. This is a very interesting story too. It probably comes more into focus when you have news like what you're seeing down there in Costa Rica, Dr. K, with the biggest storm seen in a long time rolling in. But this one's setting up in a base. Do we have any pocket pivots in there?
Not yet.
Well, what happened to the volume there? That sort of lost it.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get it to come back here. Here we go. There we go. What I'm trying to do is get rid of what happens is when the volume's skewed on one day and it's real heavy. Oh, no, did it again. Doesn't want to work. But in any case, this thing's setting up along the 10-day. This looks fine. But I saw this one a lot earlier on the undercut and rally. Another one, what do you think is Square? That one's actually starting to break out, but there's no volume. But you have a couple of pocket pivots in the pattern, and in fact, you would consider this one right here. That's actually, since it closed right at the 10-day the day before, that would be considered a big gap up pocket pivot, but it comes right into the 20-day, and now you're pushing out to higher highs. So it's starting to come out of this base. That looks reasonable. It seems like it probably has a good shot there. That one could go back on our list. This is what it looks like on a weekly chart. Maybe you could consider, whoops, what happened? Here we go. You could consider this a cup with handle. Here's your cup, and the handle is about midway, but I wouldn't really focus on that so much. And you have sort of a nice big upside volume week 4 weeks ago. What do you think of Square, Dr. K?
Yeah, I think it's more viable now. It's kind of put in a lot of work since that gap up in August, and you had the overhead. It had a lot of issues, and it's shaping up a lot more constructively at this point. Again, the fundamentals that drive the company are strong. It's a good story. So yeah, this is definitely one for the watch list.
I'm watching Twilio in here. It's coming right in. It's closed just below. Let's see, where's the 10-day at? 10-day is at 35.18, so it closed about 11 cents below the 10-day line. Volume's been drying up, but this one's trying to form a low as well. Now, the one thing I would point out about these lows, if you use Acacia as an example, it forms a low. Now it's kind of trying to, bouncing around. As it bounces off the lows, you see the ranges widen up because there's going to be some overhead there, and then it's going to start to tighten up and hopefully work its way out. I think this one has a good chance because the fundamentals are still very strong. Twilio still sells at an infinite PE, so that could be an issue. But I would think you want to watch and see how it holds in this range here, because if it can hold along the 10-day line, the volume dries up next week, it could be viable along those lows. I would watch for that. So, I mean, if it busts on some heavy volume, then maybe you got a new problem. But I got to think this one is getting close to lows somewhere where it's going to start to try and round out a base. But what do you think on that one?
Yeah, I mean it's in the right group, the right area of cloud-based technologies, and so it's not surprising that it was a price leader because the story's compelling, and yeah, it's not going to be earning anything for at least the next couple of years, but the sales are very strong on this thing, and as we all know, sometimes with these types of companies that are involved in fast-growing areas, they don't need earnings to do very well. I mean, well, this is a great example. It went from mid-20s all the way up to 70. It almost tripled in price. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this. Right now, it seems like it's trying to get quiet in there, and I have my eye on it because it could say get support at its 10-day and then make a move higher. So I would love to see this one be categorized or classify this one as a volume dry-up. Much as we saw with Acacia and some of these other names, because your upside, I think, in this is quite big, just given the context of everything, given the story, and given where it's trading right now, and also given that right now we seem to be in a stronger market environment with an uptrend that is seems to be well intact with all the major averages hitting new highs. And of course, I want to say one caveat that, and I've said this a number of times before, we have an interest rate hike coming up, and historically that can put the market into some thin ice for a little while. So I wouldn't get too comfortable and just assume that, well, we've got this Trump rally going on and then everything is fine. I do expect some major bumps in the road, I would say, over the next at least the next, say, couple months. Because I think the Fed finishes its meeting mid-December, so the rates get hiked then, and then of course they'll be talking about they'll probably adopt a very neutral stance at that point, just so they don't rattle the markets. So they'll adopt a wait-and-see approach as to when they would hike for a third time. But historically speaking, the Fed has a tendency, when you have big bubbles like this QE bubble we're sitting on, they have a tendency to blow up the bubble, and you see markets come crashing down. And it's a piece that I wrote, and I'm waiting for the right time to send it. I'll probably send it closer to mid-December. But you have to be mindful of that possibility.
Yeah, but the market right now, the market's already priced in a definite rate increase in December, right?
It's priced it in, but at the same time, I think the issue I have is that we've never historically had so much debt, so much money being printed, and then you get a soft landing after that, and everything's fine. I would love it if someone had an example of that, but I've seen, the way I've seen it repeated again and again, is that when you have such a huge debt bubble, this big, what a lot of people call the debt crisis, which a lot of people and very smart people like Jimmy Rogers and Bill Gross and so on and so forth have said this bubble will make 2008 look small. And I got to say, if it plays out that way, I wouldn't be surprised that we see some sort of major reset on the markets. I think that would be good for the markets. In the past, when the Fed hiked 1, 2, or 3 times, and you got these bubbles that burst, and consequently markets that are correcting, well beyond 20 or 30%. That's good because it's the reset key. And if you see the aftermath, as long as the Fed doesn't mess it up, the aftermath is usually quite good for the market. So 1987 is an example. You had that big crash, and then the markets were able to hit new highs, I think, about a year later. 1929 was not a good situation because the Fed messed it up. They came in 1931 and aggressively hiked rates when they shouldn't have been, and that caused the Dow to drop it had already dropped about 50%, but that caused Dow to drop something like another 70%. So from peak to trough, it lost 90% of its value. But that was the Fed intervention that shouldn't have taken place. Fortunately, in 1987, they weren't aggressive like that, and they allowed markets to restore themselves. And then the year 2000, March of 2000, that was obviously the dot-com bubble top, and well, unfortunately, that was the nastiest bear market we've seen in the Nasdaq, where it lost 78% of its value. So the whole point here is just be mindful of black swan. I wouldn't call them black swan, but they are kind of akin to black swan possibilities, because we are in a tightening environment, which is good. But the markets are very fragile, and the question is, does the Fed realize that? They didn't realize it before, and odds are that they probably won't realize it now. But the price volume action will tell us everything we need to know in terms of how we regulate our stocks, and the VIX volatility model is very eager to see a reset, because that kind of volatility is very favorable. And also it washes away all the manipulation, the QE manipulation that's been going on in the market since 2009. I would love to see some sense of normality restored. Not that, we'll go, markets often don't, they don't just go back to the way they were. I'm sure we'll get a new kind of environment, but anything with less external manipulation by government bodies is always a good thing, because it reduces the risk element and the random element to markets.
Are you done? Oh, okay.
All set.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to wake up now. Somebody's asking about Delta Airlines. Well, the airlines all took off when Warren Buffett announced to the world that he had bought up the airlines a while ago. So, I mean, Warren Buffett, the media fawns all over him as some sort of virtuous sage, but I think the guy's just a big crony capitalist. So he buys up the airlines and then goes on TV and tells everybody he's buying them. And they run them all up, over the last few days. And of course, I think some of the movement's probably the perception that we're going to have an improving economy, but this is where Delta Airline is. So obviously, you're not going to buy it here, regardless of what you think our thoughts are about it. So I always hate that question, I guess. What are your thoughts? I mean, there's no thoughts. You just look at what's going on here in terms of the technicals. I guess if you wanted to buy the pocket pivot at the 200-day line, and you were alert to that, then you could have bought it and made some money. But you never know if it's going to reverse on you. But the other airlines have all done the same thing. United, Delta was the other one we're looking at right now. American, same thing. You have Southwest Airlines doing the same thing. But these are all these news moves that you had that also were pushed along by the whole Trump rally thing, like the material stock. Here's Vulcan Materials, gaps up, and this is what I'm talking about. When you see something gap up in response to some news, it's hard to jump in, because you don't know if you're going to end up something like this, or you're going to end up with something like Schwab, which gaps up and then runs up. This is more of a more coherent breakout here. Or say JP Morgan, which I like as a financial here along the 10-day line. But you don't know if they're going to stop and pull back, or they're going to keep going, because it's all based on news. There's nothing really concrete that's come out of the Trump administration, which hasn't even taken office yet, in terms of their policies. We won't know the concrete policies, the specific policies, until we see them. So it's hard to buy any of these, but if you jump on them, I guess you have a shot at making some money if you bail out quickly. I noticed Dicom was one that was moving on the Trump rally thing, and then when earnings came out, the thing broke down. So it's not always so easy
Also,
to jump on these things.
Keep in mind that we've seen a lot of fast moves in a few days on a lot of these industry groups that are Trump favorite groups.
Yeah.
So when you see something like JPM, and there's a number of these names, so you look. It's a good example to look at how the stock trades on a weekly basis, and you can see that JPM is one of these names that doesn't really go anywhere. So to say, oh wow, this stock is now really going to be moving to the upside is I think a mistaken way to look at this. It's probably going to resume that very sluggish type of movement now that the market has basically readjusted the price on this thing from 70 to 80. But from here, it's, I wouldn't be surprised to see it still trading around 80, 85, months from now, as it forms one of these very long type of sideways patterns.
Yeah, and then you have a name like Citigroup, which has rallied really hard and is just back up to the top of the pattern. So you might say that J.P. Morgan, that move is pretty much could be done for now. Because if the Fed goes, if they raise once and then they kind of back off, and you were saying you think the language will be somewhat benign, right? And they're not going to get aggressive raising rates. This could be the end of it. Like Goldman Sachs, this could be a big pot, a punch bowl that becomes shortable, because maybe they only raise once and then that's it. And this rally is kind of overdone at that point, and this could become a short relatively quickly. So that's one I've been watching that way. But it's, it's tough to jump in and just start buying this because you don't really know, since it's all news and very forward-looking in the sense of trying to anticipate what Trump's policies are going to be. It's very tough to buy into these, but some of these could become shorts like this. What do you think? That looks like it's getting there to me.
Yeah, I mean, this again, I think that this name could just resume now that it's priced in the Trump presidency. Basically, it could just resume its prior trend. I wouldn't say necessarily it's a short, because it could, if it resumes what it's done before, there's no real entry points.
Right. But you'd be watching the daily chart for signs of a breakdown. And in my book, the first sign of a potential pod top on the right side of a pod would be a breakdown through the 20-day line. So that hasn't happened yet. But we'll see how these play out. But the point, I think, Dr. K, is that I sure as hell wouldn't be buying these things up here.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Because and again, I know it's especially for ones that are more new to this style of trading. You learn that you can get conditioned to learn that, oh, these big price volume action in a stock is really good, and it could send the stock into the stratosphere, but it doesn't apply to these kinds of names. And there's other historical examples like this where you get a price adjustment due to policy change, and I mean, unless the policy change is so favorable for that group that there's like a persistence, it makes the price move, and then that's pretty much it. The party's over. And then if you bought it and you bought it near the high, and then your money's just kind of dead money as the stock resumes its old character of not really making any big moves in either direction.
So if you did buy into this on the breakout back on the day after the election, you might consider taking some profits. I want to go through some other names I'm keeping an eye on here. The Impinj, which is on our list on the way up here, may be trying to form a new base in here. It's still, let's kind of blow this up. You can see that it had a big move off of this, and from an O'Neill standpoint, there's really no base there. Maybe a flag formation here, but it kind of fails on that and then turns around and goes. So I think we picked it up on a pocket pivot as it was moving early around the 21-22 level, and that had a nice move. And now you're forming what looks like a cup with a handle. As you're pulling in, obviously the volume's going to dry up this week because it's a short week and you had a short day today. So everything you look at pretty much this week will show lighter volume, but it's less than half of weekly volume. So that actually looks like it could be setting up. Now, these guys posted a big pocket pivot off the lows back here. And if you can see this here, you see the big volume here, and this is the move. But right here, you come off the 10-day, you get above the 20-day, but you pull back into the 10-day line, and then another move back up, and you're above the 50-day line on light volume. But this all could have been somewhat engineered because they did announce a secondary offering here. So, but this had a nice move. I mean, that's like how much is it? Was it 48% or something like that, Dr. K, off the lows? But you can see it came right back on top of this structure and bounced. Undercut this low, and now it's, I mean, you could look at it as a shakeout plus N if you wanted to, but I would just look at it as an undercut and rally. And you're buying it as long as it's holding up above the low here, and giving it maybe another 3% of porosity, downside porosity there. But this, they announced it's about a 2.3 million share secondary offering when that happened last week. It's been a few days. I'm expecting it to price, and if you notice here, I've actually been nibbling on it along here because you're on top of this structure here. So you have this low base structure, it broke out here, and now you pulled back on top of it. It's on light volume, and all because of the secondary. Now the secondary is pretty minimal. What's the float on this thing right now, Dr. K?
9 million.
Yeah, so it's a small float. So they add another couple of million shares. I think that adds liquidity, and institutions I think like this story, and so they may be attracted to it more now if it gets a little more liquid and starts trading better volume. It trades about 500,000 shares right now, which isn't terrible, but it's still pretty small. But this is where I would look for some kind of turn on the pricing. So I've got tiny bit here that I'm just nibbling on over the last couple of days, and we'll see what happens here. If it doesn't work, I'll be gone very quickly. And then another one that actually was just rocketing. This is Airgain, and I'm going to show you guys another example of the old undercut and rally pattern, which is where the stock forms base, and I look for these, and this is basically a Wyckofian spring, really, because the stock has a nice move. It never has a down week. It's offered at $8, trades all the way up, doubles, it goes over 16, more than doubles. Then you finally start to correct and you build a base. Now what happens is you put a low in here, and you undercut that low, and then you turn back above it on this day on a big pocket pivot, and the stock holds tight, comes out with earnings and holds tight, and then boom, it's breaking out and it's out of here. And here's a breakout that actually works. But you see the undercut and rally setup down there. Now, it's not always so cut and dry, so it's not, my rule generally is I'll buy, so let's say the low is 12.25, so as soon as it's able to trade and hold above 12.25, I'll be in there, and I might give it another couple of percent of porosity on the downside. So, but once you get a more definitive move like this one, you can be in there, or even just waiting for earnings to come out and buying along the 50-day once you have that undercut and rally, and you've got some reference points for support underneath. And then this thing has a massive upside move where it doubles in just a couple days. Now they come out with a secondary offering. Now this thing had like a 7 million share float, I think it was, and of course they're going to come out with a secondary when the stock was initially offered at $8. In fact, I got to think that the company is ticked off at their investment bankers, because this thing just went straight up after it came public and it doubled. So it was obviously mispriced, underpriced on the IPO. So these guys are obviously going to come out and put out a secondary and take advantage of the increased price to unload some more shares for insiders, employees, and also for the company to raise more capital if they feel like they got gypped on the first go-around when they sold their stock for $8 on the IPO. So, this gets sold into, but you can see the institutions are trying to come into this thing, and they're liking probably the story. I've thought this was a strong story for a while. And you start to see all of this as you get profit takers, but there are institutions in there splashing water all over the place. They're probably in here on the way up as well. And there isn't enough stock to meet the demand now, so the company takes advantage of that by dumping some shares into the market. And I'd watch and see how this sets up once this prices. You held the 10-day today. It could pull in further once it prices. We'll see. But I'm always interested in a strong leader once it prices a secondary to see how that goes. Now, in the past, we haven't seen secondaries go too well for Kacher. Where did they price their secondary? Was it like at $100 even or something back here? And it just kept going down. So not sure what was up with that. But Twilio also came out with theirs, and where did they price it? Somewhere down in here.
Yeah, Kacher I think it was 100, and then it broke issue.
Yeah, and then what about Twilio? Was what, $44 or something like that? Was it in here? And it's continuing. So no guarantee necessarily that they're going to turn, but I think if you're dealing with situations where you have pretty strong fundamentals and you have earnings, like PI's got earnings, that's a good name, and I like the in terms of the fundamentals, and I like the story here. I'd like to see it grow up a little bit, so we'll just keep an eye on these. So somebody's asking about CARB. What's your opinion? I don't really have opinions. My opinion is that there is no opinion to have. If you're going to buy it, I suppose you would have bought it here on the shakeout and pocket pivot down here, and it pulls into the 20-day line, and you get another pocket pivot type move gapping up through the 10-day the next day. I mean, it's just way up there. So I don't know. It's in an uptrend, so I don't think I need to have an opinion. That's another one of those dumb questions. What is your opinion on that? I don't need to have an opinion. It's just I'm interpreting the price volume action within the context of what's going on with the company fundamentally. Once something's up like that, I mean, what opinion is there to have other than the fact that it's extended and you should have bought it down lower? But this is a tough stock to buy because it's so volatile. But weren't they going to be bought out? No, that's LifeLock that got bought out, LOCK. So at this point, it's in an uptrend, the CARB, and that's it. There's another IPO that I've been watching too. And these are easy to find. I mean, if you have HTS Investor Software, you just go into the warehouse view and you look at, you go into smart groups and HTSI starters, popular stock categories, and you go to new issues, IPOs, and you can run through those and you'll find names like this. You'll see something like, oh, look at that. That's an interesting base. Now, unfortunately, I saw this thing rounding out and it never had a pocket pivot, which never really became viable, but the thing is moving higher and it's setting up in a nice IPO U-turn. Earnings do come out, I think, on December 5th. So I'd keep an eye on this. Have you checked this story out, Dr. K?
Yeah, no, the story, again, it's a good, compelling story. It's another cloud type company, and I think that well, it's on my watch list because it's another one of these no earnings, but that's okay. The sales are very strong, and it's definitely, it's an IPO that should be watched. But
Yeah, so
obviously
this
it's
is
extended
on
up
my
here.
watch list, along with a lot of these others that are in here. I mean, the MVOL, or I'm sorry, MYOV, MYOV, or MYOV, as you like to call it.
Amyov.
That's probably in here too, yeah. I mean, and all you have to do is go through this list. There's like 208 names on this list now, but a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just, you can sort it by volume, so once they get down to like 100,000, 200,000 shares in volume, so there's like, once you get down to 42 names down the list, I don't know if you guys can see this very well, but once you get down to 42 names down, the average volume here is 205, 107, then it goes to 193 on this Verso Corporation. And so these are your thicker names, and then you can just kind of cruise through them. This one's kind of interesting, this ARNC. I've been keeping an eye on this one. Yum China Holdings. Initially, this thing came public, and I noticed the price volume action was correlating a lot to Yum, which looks like this. Let's see. Come on. Well, that's not really showing it very well, but it was correlating to this kind of move. This is a split or something. I don't think this thing gapped down like that. But
Huh, Yum C, that looks like it's a smaller, they're doing the same thing.
it's a
They're operating
Chinese Yum, yeah.
yeah, except yeah, Yum C is a China, it's doing 7,200 restaurants in China, whereas Yum is doing 42,000 restaurants all over the world.
Right.
So yeah, Yum C is the Chinese concentrated company.
Right. And so in this list, though, here you can find there's ZTO, Line in here, Acacia's in here. This Lamb Weston, I'm not sure. This is a very new one, and that's kind of setting up pretty nicely. So, you can, Nutanix, this one's setting up. This is another one to keep an eye on. They come out with earnings next Tuesday, I believe, and this is one I definitely will be keeping an eye on. Here's another one, Enersys. I don't know what this, Fortive. Yeah, some of these look okay. Hopefully you guys can see my charts okay. Here's this Adient, trades 4.2 million share, 4.3 about a day, and that's acting pretty well, Airgain, of course, shows up now, and what's Airgain's average volume? Still pretty weak here. What's going on here?
Yeah, your average volume on Airgain is 282,000.
Yeah. It's been trading closer to 6, 7 though. But I just look at the intraday volume to get a sense of where the volume movers are. And Myovant today traded 534,000 shares. And this is a great source for ideas. You see something that looks interesting, you can go on the internet and start researching and find out what the story is. Here's another interesting, Forterra, FRTA, Red Rock, Resorts. So you can see there's a whole bunch. Impinj shows up here, and a number of others. So you can see them all. Anyways, but that's one way to get, be in tune with what is out there in terms of IPOs, and you want to maintain this list. I maintain separate lists for every quarterly period. because there are names that will drop off after a couple, 3 months. I forget how long it takes, but they will drop off eventually. So I think you can do the same thing on MarketSmith and generate a recent IPO list. I like this one because a lot of times they screen names out. I don't know why, but on MarketSmith and on Wanda, and you'll get a lot more will come through on the HDSI IPO screen. So anyway, so that's an easy way to look and see what's going on with IPOs. But there's a few I like. MindBody is another one we were looking at, and we were looking at this one down here, and it did have a pocket pivot coming out, but it stalled. So this is actually a very interesting story, and I'm just keep an eye for the next buy point in this thing. But again, here's a cup with handle, broke out, pulled back to the breakout point, fakes everyone out in here, and has turned higher. So then that's a recent new issue too. So this is where a lot of the stronger names are going to be found. And I think that as long as you're seeing a lot of these names acting well, then the market's pretty healthy. Forget about, if everybody talks about financials, I've seen markets where financials either participate or are moving higher, but the market's not, or vice versa, where they're not participating and the market's moving higher. I've always found that if you have a very fertile and well-acting group of IPOs, or new merchandise as I call it, which to me is the lifeblood of any bull market, if you have a good group of those stocks that are working and acting well, then you can pretty much assume that you're in a reasonable market environment. And that's developed over the last week and a half very quickly. I mean, I was somewhat skeptical of the Trump rally initially, but I got to say I'm making money on the long side, and that tells me everything. And you get a couple of things you can mess around with on the short side. Like I shorted this gap up. You guys probably remember last week, I think it was. I shorted some, I think, while we were on the webinar, and it broke down and it's sitting down in the 50-day line, and maybe it's going to bounce off. But you'll get some of those, but they're farther and fewer between than, say, the long ideas that are working. So I'd rather, if the market pushes me more to the long side and gives me a lot more love that way, I'm going to follow the love or run for the daylight, however you want to put it. And something like this also, I've made some money clipping Mobileye at the 50-day a couple of times after earnings. But if you look at this, here's the weekly chart. So you could say that it is trying to, maybe it's building a new base. Now this thing has had nice move down, nice move up. This was a great short last year in August, and then you had the rally back up, which could have been played on the upside. It failed here, and now we've been heading lower. Now you're sort of living below the 10-week and the 40-week lines. You have a black cross. Now that looks shortable, but if you look at it on the daily chart, of course I'm always checking out the two of them, you can see that what you had here is a couple of actually pocket pivots, bottom fishing type pocket pivots. One held the 200-day, and the other one came up off the 10 and the 20-day. Now you pull in, you find some support off the lows on very heavy volume on this day, and now you're holding very tight. So this has a little bit of an undercut and rally flavor, and then this sort of tight pattern holding along the 10 and the 20-day line as volume dries up. So maybe this thing's going to try and turn. I don't know. I thought that they're in trouble, but I think I need to learn more about how their business lines up against, say, NVIDIA. And I'm even hearing that Ambarella is going to be getting involved in the driverless car technology. So there may be a lot of business to go around, and I think there's about 20, I'm going to say a quarter of the float here has been sold short. So there is a possibility if it doesn't break, it could try and round out a new base. And you do get some supporting action last week on the weekly chart on the bar here. So something to keep an eye on, and those are things I'm looking at. So there's a lot of stuff out there that looks interesting, and I think that you've got to kind of sift through it and figure out what you like and what maybe has some decent potential, and I think we picked off a few of those with some of our recent reports. It doesn't mean you're not going to have one not work out once in a while like the line did, but we'll see whether that tries to stabilize and set up again. But other than that, I think it's definitely possible to make money in this market right now because on the long side, because I have, and I've gotten away with a couple things on the short side, but I would have to say overall, the long side of this market looks to be the stronger side. So a couple other names I've been watching. Here's Yelp. I don't know if this one's trying to set up in a base here and it's going to come out. They had a great earnings report, but it's hanging along the 50-day line. You got a couple of 5-day pocket pivots in here. you have a sort of a gap up pocket pivot off the lows here after earnings, and it's hanging in there. It's got big short interest as well. So this might also have some potential. Ambarella is just talking about them. They had a pocket pivot coming up to the 50-day line. Now, that I think that came on news about something about they're doing some technology for Snapchat, but that pulled in today on lighter volume. But you have a nice move on, that would have been, what, Wednesday before Thanksgiving, in big volume. But you've got some overhead up here, so you can see that's in play. And on top of that, you have earnings due on December 1st, which I think is next Thursday. So it runs into some resistance there. Maybe this is setting up. It had a nice move following a viable gap up, sort of a bottom fishing viable gap up, which I actually liked at the time. I played the stock there. Right there, coming off the lows. So that was near off this low base area here on the weekly chart. You can see this. Here's a low base area. That's what I call this. And it comes out here, and that corresponds to the Bible gap up here. And then the stock has moved up and had a really nice move until it tried to break out here. And I think it actually showed up on IBD in this particular. See, they don't get into them until they start to look kind of obvious. And the breakout fails pretty rapidly. And if you wanted to get short at that point, I guess you could have, but I actually did try to, but you couldn't borrow the stock because the whole world's short it. So now you've come in, and I think this is something of a turnaround story, and I'd watch how this acts after earnings next week. I think this could set up, maybe it is starting to set up after holding tight, along the 20-day line earlier this week and last week, and then having the pocket pivot on Wednesday. This actually looks interesting, and we'll see what happens once earnings come out. But you can see if there is something behind all this, and Ambarella getting away from GoPro, which I think is now 10% of their business. It used to be a huge part of their business, and GoPro is a piece of garbage, so there's really less of a correlation between the two companies, at least over the last couple, 3 weeks, as Ambarella starts to move into other areas, something to keep an eye on. So anyways, we've gone over an hour now. I think you guys have some reasonable ideas to work on, to chew on over the next 2 days before we start up again on Monday. And I think there are some things working, so you just want to be methodical about what you're doing and buy at lower risk points in the patterns. You're not going to catch everything. You're not going to kiss all the babies, but I would be watching something like a Weibo next week, see how it acts along the 20-day line. It's got some overhead to work through. I'd watch the Momo, but a lot of these Chinese names kind of, we'll see, but they could react positively once it's determined that maybe Trump doesn't have all that much he's going to do to China, and that we do rely on China to some extent as a trade partner as well. So, we'll see what happens. But I wouldn't make any assumptions. Just wait for the price volume action to tell you what's going on here. With Momo, for example, it's telling you that it's trying to hold in there and maybe setting up on the undercut and rally to come out, whereas Weibo's already showing you that, okay, some nice strong accumulation on the roundabout pocket pivot coming up through the 10-day, the 20-day, and then getting above the 50-day on Wednesday, and a light volume pullback. So they're telling you that these things want to come out of it, but until you start seeing maybe BABA start to set up, although I heard Jim Chanos, who's a big hedge fund guy, is short the thing, and some of these other names, C-Trip has had some issues, NetEase is having some issues, Edu is hanging in there. I notice this Baozun, interesting little name. This is trying to set up in a cup with handle. When do they have earnings, Dr. K? Let's see, I can check that real quick.
Yeah, I can too. Let's see.
See if my number's more accurate. Oh, not till next March. So that's got, nothing in the way. That actually looks okay right there. To me, I think, well, there's no real pocket pivots that I can see off a moving average. Maybe, do we clear here? Let's see, 560. Nope. But it's, it's setting up. So maybe it'll be some of these smaller ones that end up working. Anyways, you guys, that's all we got. I need to go rest and continue digesting yesterday's meal. But hopefully giving you some food for thought here and some things to look at next week as we progress into December, which is seasonally a favorable time of the year. So anyways, that's all we got. Thanks for showing up, and we'll catch you guys next week. Have a great weekend.
So long, everyone.